My name is Riley Thompson. And today I'm sitting in a leather chair that feels too expensive for the kind of conversation we're about to have. The lawyer's office smells like old wood and money. And I can't stop looking at the framed degrees on his wall. Like they'll explain how we all ended up here. Across from me are my parents. Silent but seething. Their arms crossed like they've already decided I don't belong in this room. Outside. The wind is shaking, the autumn leaves against the glass. And I wish I were anywhere else. But I promised him I'd be here. My grandfather, Jack Harper, passed away 3 weeks ago. I was the one who held his hand through the final days. Who made sure his morphine drip didn't run out at 3 a.m. Who changed his linens when the nurses were too busy to care. I remember the last thing he said to me. Not "I love you." Though he did. Not "goodbye." Though I felt it. He said, "Just trust the process." Riley. Even if it gets loud. I didn't understand what he meant then. But I'm starting to. Because the silence in this office is a kind of storm. And I'm in the eye of it. The lawyer clears his throat. And the air changes. I can feel both of them tense. Like they're waiting for a prize to fall into their lap. My father glances at me like I'm a speed bump on his road to the payout. My mother hasn't looked me in the eye since the funeral. She cried harder over the flower arrangements than she did when they lowered his casket. I'm not sure what I expect from this reading. I didn't care about his money. I cared about the man who taught me to drive stick. Who whittled wood while humming Old Johnny Cash. Who told me that truth was something you held. Even if your hands got burned. But part of me wonders if he left anything behind not for me. But for them to finally see who I am. That maybe this day is more than just a will? Maybe it's a reckoning. The lawyer reaches into a folder and slides something across the polished desk. It's a check. A real one. My name is printed in sharp ink. And the amount makes my throat tighten $7 million. For a second, the numbers don't register. Then I hear the sound my mother makes. It's not surprise. It's fury wrapped in disbelief. "What is this?" she hisses. Already reaching for it. That can't be right. That's a mistake. Jack wasn't thinking clearly near the end. He was on morphine. This isn't real. The lawyer doesn't flinch. It's very real. Mr. Harper revised his will 3 months before his passing. The check is made out to Riley. And the rest of the terms will be read shortly. My father leans forward. Face red. Jaw tight. He couldn't have done this. He barely recognized me in August. He called me by his brother's name. I speak for the first time. He knew exactly who you were. That's why he made the changes. My voice lands like glass breaking. My mother rounds on me. Don't you, Dari. Don't you stand there and act like you understand? You were always the charity case. Riley? He pitied you. I don't respond. I don't flinch. Because in that moment, I realized the check was never the point. This is the reveal. This is the test he talked about. Then, without warning, my father grabs the check from the desk. For a split second, I think he might tear it. But he goes one step further. He takes out a lighter. The tiny flicker grows into flame. And he holds it to the edge of the paper. I watch it curl. Blacken. Turn to ash right there on the desk. Silence falls like a punch to the gut. The lawyer doesn't move. My mother gasps but says nothing. I sit still. Watching the last edge of the check fall into a dark pile. Then I do something no one expects. I smile. Not because I've lost the money. Because I never came for it. Because I know something they don't. The real inheritance isn't something that fits on paper. And something in my gut tells me this isn't over. Not by a long shot. When I was 9, Grandpa Jack taught me how to bait a hook with bare fingers. I flinched at the wriggling worm. But he just chuckled and said, "The world's full of worse things than this? Gid. Might as well face it straight." That was the first rule he ever gave me, face things head on. Even when they make your stomach turn. We spent summers in his rusty red truck. The one with the cracked dashboard and the country radio that only played when you hit the side just right. He'd take me to the lake at 5 in the morning, no matter how much I groaned. And we'd sit for hours in silence. Not awkward silence, the kind that felt like breathing. He said real company doesn't need noise to matter. He never gave me lectures about money, but he gave me envelopes. I remember him handing me my first $20 bill after I cleaned out the gutters of his shed. Don't spend it all in one place. Actually, try not to spend it at all. Let's see what it teaches you. Another rule: money is a tool, not a trophy. He lived like a man who could afford more but didn't want more. His television was old. His boots were patched. But his books were new, and his pantry was always full. He told me value isn't about the price tag, it's about how long something lasts. How it makes you feel when no one's watching. He said people confuse flash with worth. That's how they end up broke and bitter. On Sunday nights, he'd let me help him oil his tools. Wrenches, saws, even a hand drill from the 70s. It wasn't about the work. It was about teaching me care. Take care of what's yours, Riley. And take care of yourself like you'd care for these tools, steady and honest. That was the rule that stuck the most. He never raised his voice. Never had to. His rules weren't orders, they were anchors. Quiet reminders that I didn't need to chase anything loud to be whole. I just needed to live in a way that I could respect myself the next morning. And I do. Because of him. I do. At home, it was always noise. Always a show. My parents bought things they couldn't afford to impress people who didn't care. They argued in whispers when guests were around, then yelled when the door clicked shut. Everything had to be big: the car, the kitchen island, the vacation photos. But none of it ever felt real. My father changed cars like other men changed shirts, leasing what he couldn't buy, flashing keys like medals. He once said, "It's not about what we have. It's about what they think we have." That sentence burned into me like a warning sign. My mother nodded along. She knew how to pose for pictures, but never how to hold a moment. They hated when I wore thrift store jeans, even if they fit better. Hated when I said no to dinner parties or didn't post on Instagram. At first, I tried to please them, smiled through the fake, followed their script. But the older I got, the more I saw the cracks. The debt, the pretending, the hunger that no amount of spending ever filled. We'd sit at the dinner table, them talking about what the neighbors bought, and I'd zone out thinking about Grandpa Jack's workshop, about how he let things be quiet, about how I never had to perform around him. At some point, the love in our house got replaced by the pressure to look perfect. And I stopped trying. By 17, I stopped asking them for advice. By 19, I stopped expecting warmth. They thought I was cold. But I was just tired of feeling like a stranger in my own family. So I kept my distance. Because loving people doesn't mean letting them shape you into something you're not. It means choosing to hold your shape, even when they don't see it. It started with a phone call. My mother's voice was unusually soft, almost rehearsed. She said they needed to talk. I already knew something was wrong. They never called unless they wanted something. But I still drove over. I still hoped maybe this time it would be different. They sat me down in the living room, surrounded by throw pillows and a brand new chandelier they couldn't afford. My father got right to the point. The house was in trouble. They needed $40. Zero to avoid foreclosure. He said it like it was obvious I'd help. Like I owed them. I didn't say no immediately. I asked questions about their savings. About the loans. My mother waved her hand like I was being dramatic. "We're your parents," she said. "You help family. That's what family does." But I could feel it already. The same script they'd used all my life. Love measured in guilt. Loyalty measured in silence. I told them I didn't have that kind of money available. That was partly true. The truth they didn't like was I wouldn't have given it to them even if I did. Because I knew where it would go, not to the mortgage. but to cover a dozen other holes they kept digging for themselves. I told them I couldn't be their safety net anymore. My father's face darkened. My mother started crying, accusing me of being cold. Ungrateful. She said Grandpa Jack had poisoned me, turned me against them. But what they didn't understand was, I'd made this choice long before that conversation. I'd made it every time they lied, every time they demanded more than they gave. When I walked out that night, I knew I was shutting a door that might never open again. They stopped calling. No birthday text. No holidays. Just silence. And then, as if life was testing whether I really meant it, Grandpa Jack's doctor called me. Cancer. Stage 4. He didn't have long. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, and just staring at the wall. It wasn't just grief. It was a wave of knowing that whatever strength I had left, I'd need to use it now. Not for them, for him. The hospital room was quiet. Just the steady beeping of machines and the sound of his breath, thinner than I'd ever heard it. He looked smaller than I remembered, but when he opened his eyes and saw me, there was still light in them. He smiled. Not wide. Just enough to say, "You made it." I sat beside him every day that week, reading aloud when he was tired, holding his hand when he couldn't speak. On the last night, he asked everyone to leave. Just me and him. I knew what was coming, but it still broke me when he started talking. "You're gonna feel alone sometimes," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But you won't be. Not really. You know who you are. That's more than most people ever figure out." I nodded, trying to hold it together, but my hands were shaking. Then he reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a small metal key on a string. He placed it in my hand. "When it's time, you'll know what to do with this." I wanted to ask what it opened. He just smiled. "Trust the process, Riley. Even if it gets loud." He didn't say goodbye. He just squeezed my fingers once. Like punctuation at the end of a story only we understood. I stayed with him until morning. When the machine stopped, the world didn't. The sun came up. People walked past the window. But something in me shifted. I left the hospital that day with a key in my hand and a promise in my chest. I didn't know yet what he'd planned, but I knew he'd made it for me, and I wouldn't let it go to waste. The official reading of the will was held in the same office. But this time there were more papers, more formality, and less pretending. My parents sat stiffly beside me, their smiles brittle, their eyes darting to every envelope like they were waiting for the big reveal. I sat quiet, hands folded in my lap, heart steady. The lawyer began with standard language. Disclaimers. Statements of mental competence. My father nodded like he understood, though I knew he didn't care. He just wanted the numbers. My mother tilted forward, eyes narrow. Then came the part they'd been waiting for. To my daughter and son-in-law, the lawyer read, "I leave the contents of the family home, excluding any items listed elsewhere. I hope these belongings bring you comfort and reflection." My mother blinked. My father leaned forward. "That's it?" he asked. The lawyer didn't answer. He just continued reading. "To my granddaughter, Riley Thompson, I leave the balance of my estate, including liquid assets, investments, and the proceeds of the Harper Trust." He paused. "Which amounts to approximately $12.4 million. There was no sound in the room, only breath shallow. Stunned. My father stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. He was manipulated, he said. He was confused at the end. "This can't stand." My mother didn't speak. Her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles turned white. Then the lawyer pulled out a letter handwritten, sealed. "This is from Mr. Harper. He asked me to read it only if there was destruction." He glanced at me, then continued, "If you are hearing this, then the check I gave Riley was destroyed. It wasn't about the money. It was a mirror. I needed to know who you still were when you thought you were winning, and who you became when you thought you were losing. My throat tightened. The room felt cold, like he was still watching. And in a way, he was. This wasn't just a will. It was a final move in a game he'd been playing alone to protect me from them, and to make sure their true nature wasn't hidden by politeness or pretense. The trap was never about catching them. It was about revealing them. And they walked right into it. The lawyer cleared his throat again, lifting a small remote from his briefcase. "There's one more thing," he said. A screen descended from the ceiling behind his desk. A security recording played grainy footage from the day of the initial meeting. My father lighting the check. My mother watching. Not stopping him. Their voices captured clearly. Their rage undeniable. Alongside the video was a signed clause, an amendment Grandpa Jack had added months before his passing. In the event of any deliberate destruction of assets or evidence of coercion, the responsible parties will forfeit their share of the estate. The room was silent. Even my father stopped moving. The lawyer clicked off the video. "This clause is legally binding and will be enforced." My mother opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. There was nothing left to say. They hadn't just lost money. They'd failed the test. And now, everyone knew it. I sat back in my chair. Not triumphant. Just tired. Grandpa Jack had thought of everything, down to the flames, down to their reactions. It wasn't about punishment. It was protection. He didn't just leave me money. He left me a shield. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to explain who I was. He already had. In every clause, every condition, every word. It took me 2 weeks to gather the courage to use the key. I didn't even know what it opened until I found the envelope at the bottom of his old file cabinet, the one marked Box 218. A safe deposit box at a downtown bank. I made the appointment. I waited in the cold, the fluorescent silence of a private vault room, while the banker unlocked the steel drawer. Inside, there was only one thing. A USB drive. No label. Just silver and plain. I brought it home. Closed the curtains. And plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered. And then there he was. Grandpa Jack. Sitting at the workbench in his garage. Wearing that same old plaid shirt I used to tug on when I was little. He looked straight at the camera. Like he could see me. "Hey there, kid," he said, smiling gently. "If you're watching this, then it means the old man's out of here. But don't worry. I didn't leave you alone." I couldn't breathe. I sat with my hand over my mouth. Tears already threatening. But I didn't look away. He kept talking. I didn't always know how to say the right thing when I was around you. Sometimes I said too little. Sometimes I let your parents say too much. But I saw you, Riley. From the moment you were born, I saw the way you looked at the world. And I knew, this one's different. He paused to take a sip from a chipped mug. Then chuckled. They're probably real mad by now. That check I knew would get burned. I didn't want to punish them. I just wanted the truth to show, and I knew it would. The camera shook slightly as he leaned closer. "You didn't need to earn anything from me, Riley. Not money. Not approval. You already had what mattered. My trust. My pride. I watched you care for me when no one else showed up. You held my hand. And you didn't look away. That's love. That's strength." He reached for something off-screen. I held it up, the same key I now wore around my neck. "Everything in that box is yours. And everything in you is already enough." My eyes were blurred by then. I didn't wipe them. I just sat and let him finish. "I hope you use what I left you to build. Not just for yourself, but for others. You don't need to prove a damn thing to anybody. Especially not them." He smiled again. Slower this time. "I'll see you on the other side. Kid, don't forget who you are." The screen went black, and I just sat there. Still, held by silence. held by him. After the video, I returned to the bank. I asked to open the second layer of the deposit box, the one marked private. Inside was a black folder. A thick one. Tucked inside were documents. Perfectly organized. Labeled in Grandpa Jack's handwriting. Financial statements. Letters. Witness declarations. Audio recordings. Even notarized testimony. It was everything I might need. Everything he anticipated I could face, and didn't want me to face alone. There was a signed statement explaining his mental clarity, recorded 2 months before his passing, with 2 doctors present, a dated journal entry about his decision to restructure the will, a letter to my parents, never sent, explaining his disappointment. It was gentle, but firm. He hadn't stopped loving them. He just refused to reward their cruelty. There were photos. 2. Receipts of the money they borrowed and never repaid. Text messages. Voicemails they probably forgot they left. Proof that everything I remembered wasn't just emotion, it was fact. But what struck me the most was a small, handwritten note, tucked at the end of the folder. Riley, if you're reading this, then I'm proud of you again. Not for surviving, for standing. These papers aren't a weapon. They're a wall. So, no one can knock you down again. Use them only if you have to. But never forget, you don't have to be afraid anymore. It wasn't just protection. It was permission. Permission to walk forward without fear. Permission to live without the weight of their voices in my head. I closed the folder. I held it for a while before putting it back in the box. That day, I walked out of the vault taller. Not because I had backup, but because I knew, in every way that counted, I wasn't alone. He built this for me. So I could build whatever came next. When the money finally cleared, I didn't celebrate. I didn't buy a new car or take a vacation. I sat on my couch, in my 1-bedroom apartment, and stared at the number on the screen. 7 figures. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like mine. It felt like a test I had already passed, and now it was time to do something with the result. I remembered how Grandpa Jack used to say, "Money's only useful if it moves through you, not into you." So I started by setting up a scholarship fund in his name. Not just for kids with high grades. For kids like me, quiet ones. Overlooked ones. The kind who work 2 jobs and still feel invisible. I called it the Jack Harper Start Fund. First-generation students. Trade schools. Second chances. That's who we helped first. Then I started something I never thought I would, a small nonprofit teaching financial literacy to teens. I called it Know the Game. Grandpa used to say schools teach you to pass tests, not to survive life. So we changed that. We ran workshops in neighborhoods no one wanted to invest in. We handed out budgeting tools, taught kids how credit worked, showed them how to read contracts before they signed their names on anything. People told me I was crazy not to move somewhere nicer. But I kept my same apartment, same coffee maker. I upgraded my laptop, got health insurance, and paid off my student loans. That was it. The rest went into the fund, into the programs, into making sure other kids didn't feel as trapped as I once did. I didn't do any of it to be noble. I did it because it felt right. Because I knew what it was like to feel small and alone and unheard. Grandpa Jack never once told me what I had to become. He just told me to become someone I could live with. I think I've done that. The funny thing about money is, it reveals people. It doesn't change them. It just shows you who they already were. And now that I had more than I ever expected, I finally understood what it meant to use it well. It wasn't for things. It was for freedom. And giving other people a little of that freedom too that felt like something he'd be proud of. A few months after everything settled, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank document. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing. It was a contract. A small one. A conditional fund. For my parents. I didn't do it because they apologized. They didn't. I didn't do it because they deserved it. They didn't earn that either. But I did it because I needed to let go. Not for them. For me, it was a trust-limited access. Oversight required. Tied to health and housing. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to cover what mattered. With clauses, boundaries, like the ones Grandpa Jack taught me to set, I asked a lawyer to review it. We kept it simple. No handouts. Just a hand offered if they chose to take it without clause. I didn't expect a thank you. And I didn't get one. I mailed the paperwork and never followed up. That was enough. Forgiveness doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like saying, I'm done carrying this, and letting it stay where it falls. I didn't write that fund to make peace with them. I wrote it to make peace with myself. To remind myself that I wasn't bitter. Just finished. That's what Grandpa meant. I think, when he said to live steady and honest, forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was the final strength. The one that let me walk away not as a victim, but as someone free. If you've made it this far, thank you. Really. I don't know who you are or what brought you here. But I want you to know something. This story wasn't just about inheritance or money or family drama. It was about choice. And maybe, in some way, it's about your story too. Have you ever had to stand up for what you believed in? Even when it meant standing alone. Have you ever looked at someone you loved and realized they never really saw you? It's one of the hardest things to choose yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that says, I deserve peace too. For years, I thought if I just proved myself enough, if I worked hard enough, loved deeply enough, stayed quiet long enough, someone would finally say, you matter. But that day never came. Not from them. And that silence used to hurt more than anything. Until one day, I realized I could say it to myself. You matter. You are enough. Even if they never say it. Especially if they never do. I used to think forgiveness meant letting people back in. Now I know it just means letting them go without letting them break you. And sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who should have protected us first. That truth is heavy. But carrying it isn't your job anymore. So here's what I hope for you, that you never trade your values for approval. That you trust your gut, even when it shakes. And that you learn to love the version of yourself who walked through fire, not just the one who made it out. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one who gets overlooked, doubted, or dismissed, I see you. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be clear about who you are. And if this story felt like yours in some way, share it. In the comments, in a message, or with someone who needs it. You're not alone. There are more of us than you think, people who choose peace over perfection. Values over validation. Love over legacy. Thank you for sitting with me through this. For listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. If this story gave you something strength, closure, clarity, I hope you'll stay. Subscribe. Stick around. There's more coming. Because sometimes the family we build is the one we meet through stories like this. And I'm glad you're here.